The first rays of dawn filter through the dense canopy, casting a dappled light on the dirt path ahead of me. As I trudge along, the cacophony of the jungle's morning symphony surrounds me. Chattering monkeys, the distant call of a toucan, and the incessant hum of insects. For a moment, I pause to soak it all in. Back home in London, the mornings are filled with the sounds of the city, car engines, hurried footsteps, and the occasional siren. Here, on the edge of the Costa Rican jungle, the world feels alive in a way I've never experienced before. I reach the gates of the wildlife hospital, a modest but bustling compound nestled against the verdant expanse of jungle. The air is thick with humidity and the scent of earth and foliage. I take a deep breath, savoring the unfamiliar aroma, and push open the gate. The hospital is already a hive of activity. Staff and volunteers move with purpose, tending to enclosures and preparing food for the various species under their care. "Buenos dias, Tom," calls out Maria, one of the veterinarians, as she walks by cradling a young sloth in her arms. Her smile's warm, and despite the early hour, her energy is infectious. I return her greeting with a nod and a grin. My rudimentary Spanish is still too rough for casual conversation. I make my way to the main building, a rustic structure made of wood and stone, where I find Dr. Ortega, the hospital's head veterinarian. He was bent over a table examining an injured macaw. His brow furrowed in concentration. I hesitated, so I didn't disturb him. After a moment, he looks up and gives me a curt nod. "Morning, Tom," he says in his heavily accented English. "Ready for another day?" "Absolutely," I reply, eager to dive into whatever tasks await me. Every day here brings new challenges and surprises, unlike anything I'd ever faced working in an office back home. One day you're cleaning out an aviary full of squawking parrots, the next you're feeding some small crocodiles their morning fish. Dr. Ortega straightens up, wiping his hands on a cloth. "We have a busy day ahead. There's a new arrival, an ocelot with a leg injury. You'll help Maria with the preliminary assessment. After that, we need you to check on the howler monkeys we released last week. Make sure they're adapting well to the wild." I nod, my pulse quickening with anticipation. Each task is a learning opportunity, which I hold sacred. A chance to make a real difference, after all. As I step out into the morning light, I can't help but appreciate what's around me. This wild, unpredictable place is starting to feel like a home, even after just a few days. The days at the wildlife hospital follow a rhythm that's both relentless and deeply satisfying. As a volunteer, my duties range from feeding the animals to assisting with medical procedures. Each morning begins with a briefing from Dr. Ortega, who assigns tasks based on the day's priorities. Today, Maria and I are tasked with checking on the howler monkeys and preparing food for the various birds recovering in our aviary. We started with the howler monkeys. Armed with binoculars and notepads, we trekked a short distance into the jungle to observe the group we released last week. Their loud, guttural calls echo through the trees in the early hours, so it's easy to tell they're nearby. A comforting reminder that they're thriving, though. I jot down notes as Maria keeps a close watch, her keen eyes missing absolutely nothing. "Look at them," she says, voice filled with pride. "They're adapting well. I think they'll be fine on their own." I nod, a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. It's amazing to see them out here, isn't it? Maria turns to me, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "Better than an office job, right?" I laugh, the sound mingling with the jungle noises around us. "Much better." Back at the hospital, we move on to preparing food for the birds. It's a meticulous task, ensuring each species gets the right nutrients. As we chop fruit and measure out portions of seeds and insects, Maria begins one of her favorite pastimes. Teasing me, of course. But more specifically with scary stories. I'm not a fan of horror in the slightest, but unfortunately, Maria got wind of this.
Have you heard about the Brujas, Tom?
She asks, her tone playful. I roll my eyes, but can't help grinning. Not another one of your ghost stories, Maria.
Oh, but this one is good,
she insists, leaning in conspiratorially.
The Brujas are witches who live deep in the jungle. They can shapeshift into animals and use their magic to protect their home. But if you disrespect the jungle or harm its creatures, they'll come for you.
You know I'm not a fan of scary stories, even weak ones like this. Her eyes twinkled with mischief.
That's why I tell them.
Despite myself, I can't help but be drawn to her stories. There's something enchanting about the way she talks, her passion for her culture and the natural world blending seamlessly. I find myself listening intently, even if the topic goes to something that makes me shiver. The rest of the day passes with a blur of activity. We treat a wounded toucan, clean the enclosures, and check on the progress of a baby anteater recovering from an infection. Each task, though routine, feels significant, like a small but crucial step in a larger mission. As evening falls, the jungle begins to hum with nocturnal life. I sit with Maria on the porch of the main building, the air thick with the scent of blooming flowers and the sounds of chirping insects. The stars overhead are brilliant, unpolluted by city lights. You know, despite your spooky stories, I really love it here. Maria smiles, her expression softening.
I'm glad. This place could use more people who care.
We sit in companionable silence, the jungle around us a living, breathing entity. For the first time in a long while, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. As the evening deepens, Maria leans back in her chair and looks at me with a gleam in her eye.
All right, Tom. Since you're such a fan of my stories, let me tell you about my grandfather and his encounter with a bruja.
I groan playfully. Do I really have a choice?
Not at all,
she laughs.
But this one's different. It's not just a story, it's something that really happened.
Her tone shifts, becoming more serious, and I find myself leaning in, caught despite my apprehension.
My grandfather was a stubborn man. He worked as a farmer by the edge of the jungle, and he didn't always respect the old traditions. After a long day in the fields, he lit a cigarette and carelessly tossed the butt aside. He didn't notice that it landed on a dry patch of grass.
Maria's voice takes on a somber tone.
The grass caught fire, and soon a small section of the jungle was burning. By the time he realized and managed to put it out, a good chunk of the land had been scorched. He thought that was the end of it. Just an unfortunate accident.
She paused, her gaze distant, as if seeing the events unfold.
But that night, he began to hear strange noises outside of his house. At first, it was just the rustling in the bushes and the occasional whispering sound. He shrugged it off, thinking it was just the wind or animals. The noises continued. Every night, they grew louder and more persistent. Sometimes, he'd hear footsteps right outside his window, but when he looked, no one was there. Other times, he'd catch glimpses of eyes shining in the darkness watching him.
A chill runs down my spine as she describes the eerie occurrence.
One night,
Maria continues,
he saw a shadowy figure standing at the edge of his property. It was tall and thin, with eyes that glowed like embers. When he tried to approach it, the figure vanished, leaving behind a small trail of animal tracks. Jaguar, snake, owl, all mixed together. After that,
she says, her voice barely above a whisper,
he started losing his voice. It happened slowly, over a few weeks. He couldn't explain it. Doctors couldn't find anything physically wrong, but soon he was completely mute. He couldn't speak a single word.
I sit in stunned silence, the gravity of her words sinking in.
He believed it was the Brujas punishing him. For disrespecting the jungle, for not showing proper reverence. He lived the rest of his life in silence, always careful, always respectful of the forest.
She finished her story and looked at me, her eyes searching mine.
So, Tom, when I tell you these stories, it's not just for fun. There are things in this jungle that we don't fully understand. It's important that you remember that.
I swallowed hard, the unease settling in my stomach. I get it, Maria. I'll be careful. She smiles, but it's a sad smile.
Good. The jungle is beautiful and full of life, but it's also powerful. It deserves our respect.
After Maria finishes her story, a heavy silence settles between us. The jungle symphony continues a nightly serenade, but the air between us feels charged with unspoken words and emotions. I glance at Maria, her face half lit by the moonlight, her expression unreadable.
Tom?
She says softly, breaking the silence. Her voice is tender, filled with something that makes my heart race. Before I can respond, she leans in, her lips brushing against mine in a tentative kiss. The world around us fades away as I kiss her back, our surroundings swallowed by the night. She takes my hand, leading me inside the main building and down the hallway to her room. The door closes behind us, and the night unfolds in a blur of passion and whispered words. The first light of dawn filters through the thin curtains when I awake. Maria is still asleep beside me, her breath soft and steady. I lie there for a moment, savoring the quiet, the warmth of her presence. But a prickling sensation on the back of my neck draws my attention to the window. An owl sits on the windowsill, its eyes large and unblinking, staring directly at me. The sight sends a shiver down my spine. The owl's gaze is intense, almost accusatory, and I feel an irrational wave of fear. I try to ignore it, closing my eyes, trying to get back to sleep for a little bit. When I open my eyes, the owl's still there. Its piercing gaze was unwavering. I sit up slowly, careful not to wake Maria, and move to the window. "Shoo!" I whisper, waving my hand. The owl doesn't budge, its eyes locked onto mine. "Go on, get out!" I say a little louder, my voice shaking slightly, but the owl remains, its presence eerie and unsettling. Its eyes seem to bore into my soul, and the words of Maria's story echo in my mind. My heart pounds in my chest, and I take a step back. "Maria," I whisper urgently, reaching out to shake her shoulder. "Maria, wake up." She stirs, blinking sleepily at me. "What is it, Tom?" she asks, her voice thick with sleep. "Look," I say, pointing to the window. "There's an owl." She sits up, her eyes following my gesture. When she sees the owl, her expression shifts from confusion to something more guarded. "It's just an owl, Tom," she says, but there's a hint of something in her voice. Fear, perhaps, or recognition. "It won't leave," I say, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's just staring. Maria gets out of bed and approaches the window slowly. She stands there for a moment, facing the owl, before speaking softly in Spanish. I couldn't catch all the words, but they sounded like a prayer or a plea. The owl blinks once, then spreads its wings and flies off into the early morning light. Maria watches it go, then turns back to me, her face a little paler than usual. "What was that?" I asked, my voice a little shaky. She shakes her head, climbing back into bed and pulling the covers around us. "Sometimes," she says softly, "the jungle reminds us of its presence. It's probably nothing, but it's best to be careful." I nod, still feeling the residual fear from the owl's presence. Maria wraps her arms around me, and gradually my heartbeat slows. The jungle outside continues its waking chorus, and I hold Maria close, silently promising myself to respect this strange custom. The first light of morning brings a sense of calm, but it doesn't last. As the sun rises higher, the peacefulness of the jungle is shattered by the arrival of a frantic local boy at the gates of the hospital. His clothes are dirt-stained, and his face is flushed with urgency. "Incendio! Animales heridos!" he shouts out of breath. Maria and I rush to meet him, the boy's words sending a chill down my spine. Fire. Injured animals. "Calma, niño. Dinos qué te pasa," Maria says, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "El granjero. Quemó la jungla," he gasped. "Los animales necesitan ayuda." Apparently, he said, the farmer is burning a patch of the jungle. The animals are hurt and they need help. Maria's eyes widen and she exchanges a grave look with me. "We need to move quickly," she says, already turning to gather supplies. Within minutes, the hospital is a hive of activity. Volunteers and staff mobilize with practice efficiency, loading medical kits, cages, and water into trucks. I grab my pack and follow Maria, my heart pounding with a mix of fear, but determination as well. The description of the farmer fits a man I've seen around town. A gruff, unkind man known for causing trouble and mistreating any street animals. His reputation for cruelty and disregard for the environment has made him a pariah in the community. When we arrive, the scene is worse than I imagined. The air is thick with smoke, and the charred remnants of trees stand like skeletal sentinels against the smouldering earth. Animals are scattered everywhere. Monkeys with singed fur, birds with burned wings, and small mammals limping through the underbrush. The devastation is heart-wrenching. "Tom, over here!" Maria calls, her voice cutting through the chaos. I hurry to her side, where she's tending to a young capuchin monkey with a deep burn on its back. "Hold him steady," she instructs, and I do my best to keep the little creature calm while she applies ointment and wraps around it. Around us, the team works tirelessly, but it's clear we're overwhelmed. The sheer number of injured creatures is staggering. Every few moments, another animal is brought to us, each one a testament to the farmer's reckless nature. As we work, I can't believe my eyes. I catch sight of the man himself, standing a little ways in the distance with a smug expression, arms crossed over his chest. My blood boils at the sight of him. His blatant disregard for suffering. "Tom," Maria says quietly, noticing my clenched fists. "We can't deal with him now. The animals need us more." She's right, of course. We work through the morning and well into the afternoon, tending to as many animals as we can, stabilizing them for transport back to the hospital. The air is filled with the sounds of pain and fear, but also the voices of our team who are determined to help. By the time we load the last of the injured animals into the trucks, I'm exhausted, physically and emotionally. We drive back to the hospital in silence, the weight of the day pressing heavily on all of us. Back at the hospital, we set up makeshift triage areas to handle the influx of patients. We work deep into the evening, but there's a grim sense of satisfaction in the effort. We're making a difference, however small. As I tend to a sloth with singed fur, I can't help but think about the farmer and his callousness, and in doing so, I think about the owl, strangely enough. Its eerie stare that morning comes back to me. I wonder why. Maria catches my eye from across the room, giving me a tired but encouraging smile. Despite the horrors of the day, there's a resilience in her that gives me strength. We'll keep fighting for these animals. We come to a finish, and my fatigue gnaws at me as I finally collapse into my cot in the staff quarters. Sleep takes me quickly, but it brings absolutely no peace. I dream. In my dream, I'm in the jungle again, but it's not the vibrant, life-filled place I know. It's dark and twisted, filled with the shadows of injured creatures and the sound of crackling flames. The farmer stands in the midst of the destruction, his cruel laughter echoing through the trees. Anger surges within me, a dark, unfamiliar rage. I see myself lunging at him, hands extended, driven by a fierce need to get back at him. His eyes widen. His laughter turns into choked gasps. I wake up with a start, heart pounding, the remnants of the dream clinging to me like a shroud. I sit up, trying to shake off the unsettling vision when I hear it. Persistent tapping. I turn to the window, and there it is, the owl from the previous morning, its eyes glowing from the moonlight, staring directly at me. The owl taps its beak again against the glass, a deliberate, almost beckoning motion. My breath catches in my throat as it feels as though it's calling to me, urging me to follow. I hesitate, a part of me wanting to dismiss it as a coincidence, another part of me too intrigued, too unnerved to ignore it. Unable to resist, I quietly slip out of my bed and pull on my shoes. I ease the window open, and the owl flutters to a nearby tree, waiting, clacking its beak. With a last glance back at the sleeping staff quarters, I climb out and follow the bird into the night. The owl flies slowly, keeping me in sight, leading me through the quiet streets of the small town. It's eerie, the way it moves with purpose, never once looking back to see if I'm following. I keep a few paces behind, my mind racing with the surreal nature of the situation. We pass darkened houses and empty shops, the town silent save for the soft rustle of leaves in the night breeze and the occasional call of wild animals. The owl's glowing eyes guide me until we reach the outskirts, where the houses become sparser and the jungle looms closer. My heart sinks as I realize where we're headed. The farmer's house. The owl lands on a low branch near the farmer's gate, staring directly at me. The house is dark, but a sense of foreboding hangs heavy in the air, a sense of expectancy. I swallow hard, my earlier anger replaced by a cold creeping fear. I push open the gate and step onto the property, my footsteps muffled by the soft earth. The owl watches silently as I approach the house. I stop at the front door, uncertainty gripping me. Why am I here? What does an owl want me to do or see? Before I can turn back, the door creaks open and I freeze. The farmer stands there, silhouetted by the faint light from inside, his eyes narrow with suspicion and irritation.
¿Qué deseas?
What do you want? He growls, his voice rough. I open my mouth to respond, but no words come out. The dream flashes through my mind. The anger, the violence. It feels too close, too real. The owl lets out a low, haunting hoot to break the tension. The farmer's eyes flick to the bird, and something shifts in his expression. Fear, recognition.
Salir ahora!
Leave, now. He snaps, but his voice wavers. I take a step back, my heart aflutter. The owl flutters to a branch directly above the farmer, its eyes never leaving mine. I feel a strange compulsion, a silent urge to speak, to say something. Tus acciones tienes consecuencias. La jungla observa. I couldn't believe what I heard. I couldn't believe I understood what I heard, what I said. The words surprised me as they left my lips. The farmer's face pales, and he slams the door shut. The owl lets out another eerie hoot and then takes flight, soaring back toward the jungle. I watch it go, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. I sigh deeply, looking at my surroundings, realizing how far away I am from my bed. I start to head back, but as I turn, I freeze. Standing just a few feet away is an old woman, hunched and grinning, her eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. My skin crawls and I feel a wave of terror unlike anything I've ever experienced. Hello? I stammer, my voice trembling. She doesn't respond. Instead, she extends a claw-like finger, pointing directly at me. Every instinct inside me tells me to run, but my legs don't move. I try to back away, but I collide with the door, the wood pressing into my spine. She steps closer, her grin widening, and as her finger touches my forehead, a burning sensation sears through me. I cry out, the pain intense and all-consuming. Darkness envelops me, and I fall to the ground, consciousness slipping away. When I open my eyes, daylight filters through the window. I'm in bed next to Maria, her soft breathing a stark contrast to the terror of the night. For a moment I lay still, convincing myself it was just a bizarre, vivid nightmare. Maria stirs and smiles sleepily at me. "Morning," she murmurs, snuggling closer despite the heat. I force a smile, trying to shake off the lingering fear. Eventually we get up, heading to Dr. Ortega ready for today's duties. His expression is unusually stressed. "Thomas," he says, approaching me, "did any jaguars escape last night?" I shake my head, puzzled. "No, we only have the one and he's still there. Why?" He exhales sharply, his face etched with worry. "The farmer, the one who burned the jungle, he was killed last night, most likely mauled by a jaguar." The blood drains from my face and I sit down hard on a nearby stool. What? As I sit there trying to come to grips with the situation, confused, Maria sits next to me, her eyes glancing at me. Her brow furrows with concern. "Tom, what's that on your forehead?" I blink, reaching up to touch the skin where the old woman had placed her finger. What do you mean?" She leads me to a mirror and my heart sinks. There, on my forehead, are a few distinct marks, faint but unmistakable. I'd seen them many times before. I turn my head to see Maria staring at me, her eyes wide with fear. "Tom, what's happening?" Before I can respond, a movement catches my eye. I look out the window just in time to see an owl perched on the sill, watching me with those same unblinking, knowing eyes. It hoots softly, then spreads its wings and flies off into the morning light. As I turn to look at the jaguar spots on my forehead.